Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have David Boyle presenting how EMI is changing the culture of the music industry. David is passionate about helping people make better decisions using data. He is Senior Vice President of Insight for the EMI Music Group, where he set up and now oversees the team that delivers regular, large-scale research to EMI in 25 countries. The insight from more than 750,000 interviews in the last couple of years has reached the heart of decision-making at EMI and helps, alongside skills and judgment, with everything from signing new artists to product development and market plans for EMI's biggest artists like the Beatles and Pink Floyd. He also runs Insight at zeebox, which is using rich consumer surveys and detailed user information to drive product development and product relationship personalization. David recently spoke at our Strata conference that was held in New York City, and his session was so well received that we are very excited to have him with us today, folks, to present this exclusive webcast for you all. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some housekeeping things to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for David. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for David, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure we see them for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you would like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you may need to give it permission to access your account. It will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to. And today, our hashtag is StrataConf, all one word. If you should have any problems during the event, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have problems, please post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. For choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is to close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know, we are recording today's webcast and we'll have an archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to David for his presentation. Hello, David.
Hi. Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody for joining. This is going to be a lot of fun, I promise. It's going to be a lot of fun if you're interested in music, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And I'll show you that there are very few people that aren't. It's also going to be a lot of fun if you're interested in data, which I think everybody here is, because we're going to talk about how we've brought data to bear in EMI and in the music industry. But there's going to be so many lessons in what we've done that are totally applicable to other cultural industries, other entertainment industries, but also any other businesses outside of that as well. So fun for music and fun if you like data. I'm really keen to see all the questions that you guys have got, so keep them coming, and then when we get to the end of the presentation, we're going to go through them all. So this is a story about data people and music people coming together, and I think that's one of the themes here is what happens when people deeply embedded in the business, who've worked in the business for many, many years, suddenly come across all these data people, and all these people who are used to using data suddenly come across all these people with business expertise. How do they work together, and how do they use data in the right ways? And it's going to be a really fun story. But let me start first by giving you a bit of background. I mean, why did we even start talking about data in EMI, and why does the music industry need to think about data? And the answer is pretty clear if you know anything about the music industry, or if you look at the chart showing recorded music revenues on the left-hand side of this page. I mean, over the last decade, revenues have just gone down and down and down. It's been a very sad story. The clear conclusion is that people just aren't paying for music in the ways that they once did. It's a big and bold trend, and it means the industry has to seriously stop and think about what it does and how it operates. And data for us was a really big part of that, and we'll show you what that means in a minute. But first, let's just think about what we mean by data. I mean, which data am I talking about? Particularly in the music industry, but often in any industry really. There's tons of data lying around, whether it's data we get from iTunes transactions or Spotify transactions or online video or music. There couldn't be more data available in the music industry. We've got these billions of records coming to us every week from all these providers. So which data was it that helped us to change the way we worked? And the answer is actually that, first and foremost, it wasn't any of that data. It's really big and really exciting data that everybody likes to talk about, and it's new and cool. But actually that wasn't the thing that was most useful to us. It had big problems associated with it. So for example, you can't find a person in one data set and link them to their same entity in another data set. Each data set was its own silo. You don't know much about each person who's doing all those transactions in the iTunes data or the person who's listening to that music on Spotify. So you can't analyze by the type of person. You have to treat everybody as though they're equal. And finally, each of these data sets, although they're really deep in size, they're very narrow in their scope. Each describes a certain type of behavior on a certain type of music services, and sometimes in a certain type of country. So given the really narrow scope, it just made it really hard to do what we wanted to do with these data sets. So it's not to say that these big data that we have aren't really exciting and really cool, and it's not to say they haven't been immensely helpful to us. They have, and maybe I'll talk about that more in the Q&A, but it's not the main data set we used. What we did to build our main data set was to talk to people. We spoke to people around the world. Large-scale online consumer surveys of carefully selected people to make sure that they're as representative as possible of the average person and of high-income people and of low-income people and of people who are passionate about music as well as people who just don't care about music. I'll show you that we found it hard to find them later. We asked people questions. We designed our own data set, asked the questions we wanted to ask, and built the data set we wanted to build. And then we really carefully listened to what the data was telling us. And as a result, we were able to work out loads of really interesting stuff about the industry that we just didn't know before, and it's really helped us to think differently. So we built our own data set using consumer research. And that could sound a bit waffly, but it's a big data set, and it's really cool if it's done properly. So in the last 3 years, we've spoken to 1 million people around the world, all around the world. And at any one point, so right now there's 12 people somewhere in the world taking an online interview for us, a 20-minute interview, populating that data into our database. So a massive and rich data set. And if you do this properly, it's really high quality. And if you do it properly, you can ask any question you want to ask. So we've covered literally everything we were interested in as a business, from media channels through to different products and product categories, brands that we might partner with for our artists. We've analyzed it in different languages. We play music to people. We play videos. We ask about artists. There is nothing in the music industry that we haven't researched at some point over those last 3 years. So really big, rich, and really complex data set. Great fun to start with. But so what? What did it tell us? Well, listening carefully to the responses, there's a few conclusions you draw. The first is that for some people, discovery of music or of artists is totally broken. Some people tell us that they would like to buy more music, but they just don't know what to buy these days. They have trouble finding new music. And yeah, there's all these cool music services out there that look great if you're in the industry or look great if you're an engaged music consumer, but they're not reaching everybody. For some people, discovery of music and artists is still a real problem. But that's not the answer, because for some other people, it's sales channels that are the problem. Yes, there's loads of really cool ways that you can buy or consume music nowadays, more than there's ever been before. But some people are confused by this. They just don't know where to find music that they want to buy right now. So for some people it's discovery, For some people, it's sales channels. And for some people, it's the product itself. The digital product where just a small image of the album art, no booklet, no physical thing to touch and feel, just doesn't resonate with people. Some people say they really miss the deeper relationship they used to have with music, and nowadays it's all just too virtual for them. So product, channel, discovery, all of that adds up to about 70% of all consumers that we speak to. And this is pretty typical all around the world. About 70% of consumers that we speak to are dissatisfied in some way with the music industry. We're not delivering for those people. And by breaking it down and understanding all those individual frustrations, we've been able to put together a plan for how to reach these people and what we need to do by gathering the right data and by analyzing it in the right way. Let me first show you, though, why we care about this. I mean, revenues are falling, so what? And the point is that everybody out there knows that you found this piece of music at some point which you fell in love with. A piece of music maybe, or an artist you've fallen in love with. It's touched you deeply, or maybe you've become slightly obsessed by it. That is a magical experience. But let me show you that that's not just magical for you or for me, but that everybody has that in their life. And let me show you that it's so important in people's lives that we have to do a better job connecting artists with their consumers, and we have to do a better job of helping consumers to find artists and find music that they fall in love with. Let me show you now why that's important, and it's not just about keeping revenues high. So what we did was to look at different forms of entertainment. This is young people on the left through to older people on the right-hand side, simple cut by age. This is UK data. We have the same data in lots of other countries. It tells a very similar story. And let's look at the relative ranking of different forms of entertainment. How passionate are people about different forms of entertainment? And let's throw a list up on the screen and see where we get to. To start with, this is a really loose definition of the word entertainment, so bear with me. But to start with is antiques, which is the lowest scoring kind of form of entertainment that we researched. Although for older people, it's ranked significantly more highly than some other things. Next, let's look at politics, which is slightly above antiques. And I used to work in politics, so I know exactly what it's like to work all day, every day, tirelessly to try to get people to care about something they really don't care about. And let me tell you, that's not what the issue is in the music industry. Let's find music on this list. Next, religion, which mixes in between politics and antiques in terms of relative passion. Then sport, which you might think is the thing that people are most passionate about. When someone cares about sport, boy, do they really care about sport. But when you compare it to all these other things, it just doesn't rank that highly for the whole population. For some people, yes, but for the whole population, no. Let's keep going. Photography is next, and then books, which is really high, the highest perhaps for some age groups, but really, really low for others. It doesn't have that universal passion. Other things capture people's attention. Next, traveling. Then exercising, which has the exact opposite pattern to books, for example, where younger people are more passionate than older people. Then fashion, which looks pretty similar. And games, really steep drop-off from young to old in the rank of people's passion for games. Then cinema, TV, which is universally loved. It's not number one or number two for any of the age groups we looked at, but universally loved. Really bold and strong performance there. The internet and technology, so highly ranked, dipping up towards the older groups, but still incredibly high, even for those older age groups. I find that always remarkable. And then finally music. Up there is number one for almost everybody, apart from the very older people who have moved on to slightly other forms of entertainment. But music's right there, and music really is the most loved form of entertainment. And we find this consistent in every country. So it's a magical experience. We've got to do a better job at helping people to find artists and helping artists to find their audience. And that's why we're doing this. So where does that leave us so far? Well, we've got this crisis, the declining revenues. We've got this problem. The data is telling us that 70% of people are dissatisfied in some way, frustrated in some way with the music industry. And there's immense opportunity, because 98% of people say that music is important in their life. So what do we do about it? Let's bring the data to bear. And this is what we did. This is the task we set out for ourselves. This is what we've used data for in EMI these last years. And that is that for each of our very, very different artists, and I can't emphasize enough how every single one of our artists is a totally unique personality, but totally unique performer, and connects with a totally different audience. So no data analysis is going to be helpful to us. No data sets are going to be helpful to us unless they can be analyzed for each of our artists in a very, very unique way. And we wanted to do this right from the start, not just for the big artists, not just for the headliners who capture all the press's attention. We want to do this for every one of our artists. So any tool we design, any data set we designed, we set out right from the start to make sure that it was totally applicable to big and small. So for each of our artists, what do we want to do? Analyze for each of our different countries. Because again, and this might seem obvious, it never ceases to amaze me when you look at the differences. Artists have incredibly different sets of consumers and incredibly different reactions in different countries. Even countries that are quite similar, an artist might be a superstar in one and still trying to discover his audience in another similar country. So again, no data set or no piece of analysis works for us unless it takes each of our artists and unless it also analyzes for each of our different countries, which, by the way, rules out many of the big data sets that we looked at earlier, where they're only really present in a selection of countries. Finally, so what? We understand the artist and the country, but so what? Nothing works for us unless it tells us something that we can do differently. Our task was this then. For each artist in each country, which types of consumers should we be connecting the artist with? Which types of products should we be developing in order to get those consumers interested in the artist? Which types of marketing should we be using in order for the consumers to be able to find the artist in the first place? Which of the artist's music is it that connects with those consumers? Again, different music in different countries, even for the same artist. Which prices are appropriate for those products in those markets, and which sales channels do those consumers use, or would those consumers use? It's a really detailed plan for each artist in each country, and this is the task that we set ourselves, and this is what we put the consumer research brought the consumer research to bear on, and this is how we use the consumer research these days in EMI. This is exactly what it does. It's how we think as well, and it's how it is our culture, thinking this way, those sophisticated questions, bringing analysis and data to bear and using it to help to inform. So I'm not going to go through much more about what the project is and how it works. I'm not going to show you any more examples of that. I want to spend the next part of the session, though, talking about how. I think that's the really interesting point. How did we bring all this data to bear in this business? How did we build the processes and procedures? How do we design the data sets, and how do we introduce it to the business? And there's a few lessons in here which we learned along the way, and which I've pulled together. I think they're going to apply to most businesses. So here goes. How? The first is such a simple message, and there's not rocket science, but it all too often is forgotten, is that you need to segment consumers into different types, because different people have different needs and frustrations. It's such a simple point, but it's so fundamental. When you look at an artist and the audience for that artist in a particular country, all too often in the old days, what we would have said is, 30% of people who like this artist are interested in this certain product. Well, that's very interesting. Does that mean I should do the product or not? I don't know. When you analyze by different types of consumers, you get a much clearer answer. You get the answer that this particular segment of consumers is absolutely passionate about that product. So yes, you should do that product. It's the key to unlocking that one particular type of consumer, and you know exactly who to target it at. Whereas this other type of consumer is totally uninterested in that product. The average interest is 30%. For somebody, it is the deal breaker for engaging with that artist. And for other people, don't even bother marketing it to them, don't even bother talking to them about that product. It's not what they're interested in. And that kind of insight is only you only get that kind of insight when you analyze by consumer segment, when you analyze for different types of consumers. And all too often in the real world and in businesses, we say, X% of people. No, X% of this type of person, but Y% of this type of person. So break it down by different types of people and make sure that those different types of consumers are actionable and understandable to the business as well. All too often we have segmentations in businesses, but maybe they're too technical for people to understand, or maybe they're too simple for people to be useful to people day to day. Maybe they're such caricatures of themselves and they're so focused on being cool sounding and easy to understand that actually they're not interesting or useful or powerful to people. So getting the balance right and getting segments that work for people and then using those segments time and time again in discussions and in meetings as part of the language is absolutely key. So they're not just a marketing exercise. And that's exactly what we do. We took the 1 million interviews, we boiled them down into consumer segments, and we use those segments every single day in discussions. And that means it's part of the language, and that means that even when we're in a marketing meeting and nobody's brought a graph to the meeting, nobody's crunched the data for the artist and brought charts and analysis and data, even in that meeting, just because we have the consumer segments in our heads and we've used them before, we're all in the meeting smarter and more thoughtful as a result. So when you reach the consumer segments, when the consumer segments reach language instead of just being things that exist on paper, and you're smarter even without data in the room. So thinking about different types of people is such a vital and core thing, and running it through everything you do. Next, what is the role of data in the business? Well, that's pretty simple, right? You take some data, you crunch it and mix it and mash it until you get some insight out of it, and then use the insight to make decisions. Yay, very simple. Of course it's not that simple. Of course it doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way in any business, I would argue. Decisions are always made by people with hearts and minds and skills and experience. Even in mergers and acquisitions or in banking or in politics where I've worked before, really people make decisions. You don't buy a company based on the analysis that's done in advance. The analysis really helps you to decide whether to buy it or not, don't get me wrong. But you buy it because you believe in the company and you believe in the market and you believe in the people that you've met there. The analysis will help you to focus and help to challenge you, help to set expectations, but you don't buy because of that. There has to be more involved, and often it's because of the other stuff as well. So that's true, I would argue, in any industry, and it's certainly true in music. It's such a creative business. So that's not how we describe the role of data, but how we do describe the role of data is totally fundamental to helping the business to understand it and to embrace it. This is our answer. So yes, it starts from this insight that we get out of the data, whether it's music research or consumer research, or whether it's the other industry data or Spotify or iTunes data that we mentioned before. Well, it doesn't matter. But insight from data, and the key is that sits alongside, not above or below or preceding or following, but it sits alongside skills and judgment. It sits alongside our people. And recognizing, but also focusing on the fact that it's the people in the business, it's their skills and expertise, it's the questions that they ask and the hypotheses that they have that drive the insight from the data. They say, I'm having trouble with this, can you help me work it out? Or I think this is going on in the world, can you prove this or check this? Or I think this artist is struggling here for this reason. It's their skills and expertise that drive the insight from the data. We ask the questions, analyze it in the right way, and provide the results back. But that's not to tell them the answer. It's to help them and support them in their job. And when you see insight's role as being supporting and enhancing and inspiring people, not making decisions, but enhancing and supporting people, and when you see that people are there to drive and get credit for the insight, and you start to see it in a whole different way. And together, alongside each other and together, that's how decisions get made, evidence-based decisions on the one hand, or perhaps just reasoned arguments. I want to do this, help me to prove it. Just a reasoned argument. But data is there to help and support people, and it's there because of people. and not to tell them what to do. And this is such a fundamental philosophical point about the role of data, and it's so fundamental to why data became so important at EMI, why it became so good, because people asked the right questions, and then and how it got to where it is today. So that's the role of data. Next, how do you put the data together in the first place? How do you put the insight team or the project together in the first place? And my answer to that is having principles and then sticking to them, by the way. So principles can look really good on a piece of paper or on the wall, but if they're not actually stuck to day to day, then it's, again, just marketing nonsense. So having these principles and then really sticking to them. And we started by just thinking about what consumer research or insight teams and projects often look like. Anyone who's worked with insight or consumer research will definitely recognize at least some of these words. I've got this great project done, but it kind of doesn't work for me. I don't know what to do with it. Oh, boy, was it expensive. It was very exclusive, perhaps, and that some people commissioned it in one team, but other people never really got to hear about it or share in it. It's very narrow, perhaps, because it dealt with one specific business question and didn't generalize itself to help other people. Perhaps it was too prescriptive. It told me what to do, and you know what? I need more flexibility than that. I want guidance, not to be told what to do. Maybe it wasn't global. It usually isn't global. Maybe it was a one-off and you didn't scale it and repeat it again and again. We've all seen insight projects that work this way, and this is, I guess, what inspired us to do this differently. We said that is not acceptable, and we want to do it this way. So here's our principles, which again, we live by every single day. It must be relevant to people. It must tell them something that fits into their life and the decision that they're trying to make at the time. It must fit in with the issues and questions that they have. It must be totally cheap at a unit cost so that we can then massively scale it. It must be really quick to deliver, because otherwise, between asking the question and getting the results back, the data has become irrelevant. So quick, repeatable, scalable. All people in the business must benefit from this. We said right early on, this is not just about marketing. It's not just about people who develop products. It's not just about people who work with artists. We want to help the whole of the business in this project, and so we're going to ask about all of the different business areas. It must be powerful. It must drive us to do something that's different, sufficiently different than what we would have done otherwise. Otherwise, why bother? It must be broad and covering lots of topics. Totally global. This is not about the US and Japan and the UK only. This has to be a totally global project. It must be repeatable, so the effort we put in this year pays off next year when we repeat it, and the year after when we repeat it again. We currently field 5 to 10 research projects a week, and we work in more than 26 countries, totally repeatable and scalable. And then why? Well, it must add to our shared language. A piece of work must come up with not just a number or a nice graph, but it must build on our consumer segments and our understanding of them, or build on our understanding of our artists or our products. It must add to our language, not just give us facts that exist in isolation, but build our language. And it absolutely must guide decision-making and reasoning rather than dictating what people should be doing. These principles, again, every single day we get hundreds of questions from different people around the world working on different artists and different projects, and they say, can you help with this? Can you do a study on this, please? And we take a look at it and we check it against all of these different things and say, well, which of these does that question tick and which of these does it not? And how do we adapt the question so that we can maximize the number of principles it hits? Maybe just by tweaking it slightly, we can actually do all of these things and turn it into a totally scalable and sustainable project. There's a couple more hows that I think are vitally important. One is very simple, which is to recognize that actually it's people and not technology which drives insight. Here's a very long list of various things I think come between asking a business question in the first point and then at the end having the data that you need and using it to make a difference. There's a long list of different steps that you need to go through, finding data, analysis technology, through to presenting the results. And the key thing for me when you look through this list is quite how important people are in every one of these steps. No off-the-shelf solution of technology or systems or data or processes is going to help you to do this. It's really smart people throughout this whole thing that make it possible. So yes, technology is vitally important, and yes, the data has to be good and up to standards, and the processes have to work. Yes, all those things are vitally important. But if you don't have the right people asking the right questions, then insight is not going to have the impact it could have. So recognizing that it's people and not data or systems or technology that are important. And then another point sounds slightly counterintuitive, but I absolutely believe this is that we prove and then we build, rather than promising something and then building it and waiting for it to be proven. So prove and then build. And what I mean by that can be illustrated with this example. So when we first started the Insight program, we did all this research, and instead of fancy visualization technology or custom reports to help people to use it, we used Microsoft Excel on my laptop. And you know what? That was perfectly good for the first 10 artists or so. It scaled pretty well for the first 10 artists. We signed some major deals with household name artists. We revolutionized some marketing plans. We had real impact and benefit before we had any tech spend, just based on reports built in Microsoft Excel on my computer. So we proved it with basically no cost. And then we said, all right, well, what's next? That doesn't scale very well. Let's put it into, let's automate it a little bit and bang out some PDF reports using some scripts and dump them on the network drive where people can access them. That worked pretty well up to, 100 artists or so. At this point, all the artists we were deeply involved in releasing music by that point had reports at least. Again, it didn't really cost us much to get there. We were proving it, and we were iterating it as we went along. Then we took Excel services, which basically puts an Excel sheet online and makes it look like an online reporting dashboard to the user, but means it's still Excel in the background. You can still tinker with it and evolve it and fix it and enhance it. That works pretty well. We found 1,000 artists or so. By this point, artist managers are flying around the world, and that's a private jet. And they were getting off in France or in Japan or in America, and they were hearing similar themes about marketing plans and similar language and looking at similar sets of data around the world. This is before any serious tech development. And then that doesn't scale very well. We're talking about thousands of employees and thousands of artists. So then we transitioned to reporting services, another Microsoft solution, which is much more robust and much more customizable, but requires some more developer time and is a more serious investment. So at every point what we're doing is we're proving that this adds benefit, we're proving that it adds value, and then we're saying, okay, let's take some cash and scale this a little bit, let's build that out a little bit, rather than promising the earth up front and then hoping that the tech spend delivers. That worked really well for us in technology, but it also worked really well for us in terms of level of data science we used. So instead of starting at the start and building these immense models and machine learning algorithms to understand the data sets, we started with really simple pieces of analysis, embarrassingly simple pieces of analysis. But they worked, and they told us about the world around us, and they helped us to do things differently. Then you can go on to the next level of more sophisticated analysis, and then you can get on to fancy machine learning algorithms, but prove the benefit first and then enhance it with additional either technology or data science for that matter. So they're all of the hows that I wanted to cover. I'm just going to go over some very quick lessons, and then I'm really excited to see what kind of questions you've got coming up. So by way of lessons then, the first for us is totally clear. An insight or analysis team has to work with the business, not at arm's length. We had to be in the meetings with business people every single day to understand them and their needs and their issues, but also to make sure that we were giving them information and data and insights that actually helped them to do what they did, that fitted in with their life and made sense for them. So working with the business deeply, not being at arm's length, consultant-like or sitting on a separate floor. Next, make the data or the insight totally robust and representative. We do not mess around with small sample sizes in research, let's say. Originally, we perhaps cut it a bit fine, and someone complained, so we doubled it, and then they complained again, and we doubled it again, and we doubled it one more time, actually. Don't mess around with data. Make sure that it really is fit for purpose, it really is representative, and it really is robust. This is not about marketing spin. This is about real data. So never compromise on that. Focus on hypotheses and not conclusions. Make sure that you let the business make the decisions using the data. Show them the data, show them the patterns, and let them draw the conclusions and let them own the conclusions from it. We never, anymore anyway, we never get called into meetings to present the latest findings or to tell somebody what the marketing plan should look like for an artist. That is not the role of the insight team. The role of the insight team is to make sure that everybody in that meeting, or at least some people in the meeting, totally get the data before the meeting even happens so that it comes from within. It's not an external insight person telling them the answer. They are understanding it themselves. Next, making sure that insight is part of the day-to-day for people. We decided, we tried and then decided against separate processes or forms or check boxes that need to about using insight as part of the marketing process. That didn't work very well for us, and making insight a separate thing that people need to do, or making it a separate hoop people need to jump through, just doesn't work for us. So making it just part of the day-to-day, making it work for people when they're in that hurry running to a meeting, making it just a natural part of every discussion in the meeting rather than a separate agenda item, and making sure the processes are totally simple for people to follow. So part of the day-to-day rather than making it a special thing was really key for us. And then in terms of the insight capability, it was really clear for us is that it's about building it, not just commissioning it, especially when research is concerned. Building that and owning it, being able to iterate and evolve when people ask questions, and really adapt to meet needs, rather than just commissioning it and having someone at arm's length build it for you. So that's the EMI story, and they're the lessons that we learned going through that. In summary, then, I think we've got this immense challenge and this immense opportunity presented by the music industry and changing consumers. We did an awful lot of work to analyze the data associated with that and to really understand what was happening. And by doing that in the right way, presenting data in the right way, and in the right role in the business, we've been immensely successful and so excited about how people have embraced data as part of the culture of EMI. It's been an immense ride. We've had a lot of fun doing it and a really big impact. And I hope that was fun, and I look forward to some questions.
Okay. David, great webcast, lots of chatter and people talking in the group chat here, just catching up with all the questions that have come in. Folks, we are at Q&A. If you do have a question for David and what he's been talking to you about, please open your group chat widget. It's right there in your widget tray. Click on it, open it, type in your question, send it in so he can answer it while he's with us. And David, we'll take some in the order they came in. Okay, I have a question from Ed. Ed would like to know, how did you determine the customer segments? Were these pre-existing segments or dictated by the data?
Ed, that is a great question. Thank you. And it's a really interesting one because, the answer is both. And I think I'm really, really proud of this, and it's not what most people would say, I think. And so the reality is, as I said before, that there are people in the business who are incredibly smart about their area of the business, about their artist, or about the types of consumers that they have been working with for their artist, or about who consumers were nowadays. And so the first thing we did was to gather that knowledge and come up with a set of hypotheses for who the consumer segments were. This person felt sure that there was a type of person who behaved in this way and just wanted this kind of music but didn't want this kind of music and really wanted this kind of product. He felt passionately about it. So let's hold that as a hypothesis. Let's see. So first was to gather all of the hypotheses and to boil them down into distinct types. and then go look for them in the data. And sure enough, some of them were absolutely spot on. People know the business really well, and they were totally spot on. We found that type of person, and we found them to be a really useful segment. Some people were pretty good at it, but you know what? That type of person didn't kind of want the products that they thought they wanted, and the marketing they thought that was going to work wasn't really the right type of marketing. So they kind of knew the segment, but the data was able to kind of change their understanding and enhance their understanding of the segment. Some of them ideas were for segments were actually much bigger in the real world than the person had thought they were, and some were much smaller, so we decided that they were so small that they weren't helpful to us. And some of them just plain didn't exist at all, right? And some people just had mischaracterized things. So starting with hypotheses, then go find them in the data. And then it's about saying for each segment, well, is this a real coherent group of people? Let's look at how they behave, the kind of music they listen to, the products that they want, and the marketing that they tell us about. Does this make sense? Is this coherent? And then next, is this useful to us? Like, even if that segment does exist, can we do something about it? Is there a way that we can go and get them? Is there a way that we can reach them with music and artists? So is it coherent and make sense? Is it actionable? Is there something we can do about it? And then to say, well, who's left over? Who are all these people that didn't fall into one of these buckets? And let's study their behaviors. Let's use clustering algorithms to try and pull out the different behaviors that exist within that group of people. And then either enhance or tweak other segments or pull out new segments. So it's an incredibly time-consuming and manual process, which is in part informed by, and the end result totally informed by what the data says. But it's kind of led by and shaped by people's hypotheses and the kind of ideas and beliefs they have. So a really interesting mixture of the two, I think, is the answer there.
Great, thank you. Another question here from Nils. Nils would like to know, do you give your artists access to the data or reports?
Yes, we do, yeah. Interestingly, in the early days, we were so worried about the data that we were very, very precious about it. So we would work with the artists on it in meetings, but then it kind of would only exist in meetings because we were scared about it going out in the public domain. And what we realized was that you need to be much more open and make data much more available if it's really going to be useful to people. So it's no good having a meeting and talking about data in the meeting if then outside the meeting, when all the other decisions are being made, that data isn't available, it isn't on their desks or in their hands. And so we really changed from being quite precious about it and making it a scarce resource to really making sure that everybody had access to it. So we've sat with major household name artists for hours on end going through the data. Some of them totally have loved it and just stretched the meeting on and on and on and taken more notes and asked more questions than any other presentation I've ever done. And some of them have wanted to get to the chase pretty quickly so that they can see what the conclusions are and then move on. So yes, now we're very open with everybody we work with, whether that's artists or artist managers or retailers or marketing agencies. Let's get the data out there. Let's put it in the hands of people so that it's real in their life day to day, and then let's actually use it. It's not just a marketing tool for meetings.
Super. David, as you can imagine, the questions are coming in fast and furious. So, folks, we will take as many questions as we have time for, and we'll take one now from David. David asks, can you give some examples of the benefits to the label and the artist's marketing plans, like what kinds of insights did you develop? Did you do things differently?
I think there's quite a few examples, and let me give you a couple to illustrate this. I mean, one is, there's a major household name artist, global artist, who we've been working with for many years, and for many years we've been talking about the kinds of products that we envisage for this artist, deluxe packages, going back to the archives and putting together interesting material, and the kind of marketing plans that we'd always dreamt of for this artist as well. And we've been talking about it for years, but we weren't using the right language, or we weren't persuasive enough, or the artist just didn't feel this was the right thing to do. We've kind of been having this debate for a long time, and when the research came along, we were able to just show really, really clearly that this was exactly the way to reach these consumers. So we're able to take the conversation away from, I think this, well, no, I think this, to saying, well, let's look at the data, let's see the opportunity, and then let's spend our time deciding whether we want to go get that opportunity instead of arguing about what the opportunity was in the first place. So in that example, we ended up doing exactly those big, in fact, even bigger and more exciting products and bigger and more exciting marketing than actually we thought of before, because everybody got more excited about it as a result of the data and everybody put their full heart into it. But what we did was to take off the table this debate, put the facts on the table, and then spend our time being creative about how to do that marketing or how to do those products instead of debating it. So sometimes it's about that. We kind of knew what we were doing. We were much bolder and more persuasive as a result. Sometimes it changes our mind. So there are artists where there's a new artist signed out of the UK in the last couple of years, where we had all, before the artist had any music in the real world, we had thought the artist was absolutely focused on this one type of niche consumer. We did research on the music. We played tracks by the artist before release, and it came back glowing from not just that niche consumer, but also the absolutely mainstream consumers. So from really early on in the campaign, we were able to say, actually, the opportunity is much bigger than this one niche type of consumer. We were able to go do mainstream TV advertising, for example, in order to reach that mass market consumer much earlier. And there's another example of an artist signed a couple of years ago where the opposite was true. We had thought they were very mainstream very early on, but actually the research came back and said that's not the opportunity yet. Stay focused. So we focused in on just niche types of consumers for the first few months, and the research was able to shine a light on the exact point in time when the artist appeal finally did broaden to the mainstream, as we thought it would. And we were able to, at that point, put the proper marketing budgets in place to reach mainstream consumers, but not to waste that money earlier on when it wouldn't have been appropriate. So different products, new products, bolder, more exciting, spending more money sometimes and waiting and holding back some money in other times in marketing. So lots of different examples.
Another question here from Carl. Carl would like to know, how do you motivate people to participate in these surveys? Do you offer them any incentives? And if you do, what do you offer them?
Yeah, well, we realized very early on that that's not something we want to be involved in. So we had a panel of consumers when I started at EMI, and one of the first things we did was to close the panel down, because actually our panel was incredibly passionate music consumers who are more passionate, far more passionate than even our most passionate consumer segment nowadays. So that wasn't the type of, it was a very interesting group of people, but it's not helping us to understand people out there in the real world. So, but research agencies are very good at doing that. They're very good at, and they make it their mission to find some young people and some old people, some rich people and some poor people, some people from each different region, people who care about new cool things, and people who just don't and don't live that life. So research agencies have these massive panels of people who are interested in helping out with surveys, and honest and truthful. They sense check and try trick questions to make sure that we're only getting good people who are telling the truth in these surveys, and they incentivize them for taking part. It's something like $1 per interview from memory, the incentives. So it's enough to say, thank you, I really appreciate your help. This has been important to us, but it's not enough so that it could be a revenue stream for somebody, and they would do it just for the money. They give them enough surveys so that they remain interested, and they give them not too many surveys so that they don't get bogged down. And when they're short of young people who don't care about music from the Northwest, they'll go try and find some more. So we use research agencies and all sorts of clever tricks and analytical tools to check it matches the population and to check people are being honest and truthful with us as well. And it's remarkably good and useful and accurate if it's used properly and done properly.
Super. Another question here from Josh. Josh would like to know, during the interview process, I imagine you learn a lot about your interviewees and might be tempted to refine your line of questioning. Did you find it important to adjust your questions according to what you learned about your interviewee segments, or did you find it more necessary to maintain consistency in your line of questions from beginning to end?
Interesting. So So I would say consistency is far more important, and this is the thing that we've wrestled with again and again and again in this project, is this balance between, I really want to ask the person this question, but I need to be consistent, or this artist is so special, I want to analyze the data in this really special way for this special artist, versus analyzing it in a consistent way for all artists. And whether it's about asking questions or about analyzing the results, the trade-off between doing something very custom and doing something very standard is immensely difficult. And my only regrets are the times when I've done custom things that haven't ended up being useful. I've never regretted going back and just keeping things standard, because the benefits of keeping it standard mean that what you do is incredibly scalable. It means that every one of our artists in every one of our countries can have data that's super, super helpful for them. And by keeping the analysis and interpretation standard as well, it means that every one of our people, employees in every one of our countries, can get to the point where they understand how to read the data, they understand who the different segments are, for example, and they understand what questions have been asked. And so it's horrible to say no to somebody when they say, I really would like this special piece of analysis, or I really would like to specially ask this question. It's horrible to say no to that person, but it's better to try to maintain standards that can spread much more widely and have a much bigger impact. And in the end, I think the magic thing about what we've done is the impact that it's had, the scale it's got to, and how much of an influence it's had. That's because of standards, not because of immense personalization and customization. Although I have to emphasize that you've got to get it right. So if the question's wrong and it doesn't work for somebody, that's not going to help. And if the analysis is wrong and it's not going to tell you the answer for an artist, that's not very good either. So you've got to get it right in the first place, and you've got to adapt and evolve. You've got to do that. But I don't look back and regret standardization, and I do look back and regret those times we did special one-off things that just didn't really scale.
Question here now from Dennis. It's regarding revenue decline. He says, I understand that album sales are down, but overall music purchases are increasing. Are EMI's overall revenues down?
Well, I think on the industry trends, if you look back at the 10-year graph I showed on the first slide, which is UK data, but pretty typical of the rest of the world, that the clear pattern in recorded music revenues is decline year on year, and some years it's up a little bit, and some half years we get excited about it being up a little bit, and it goes down for the full year, and depends how you count it and that kind of thing. But the clear trend is that it's been declining for the last decade. Maybe it's flat from now onwards, or maybe it's a slight bump this year. It doesn't really matter. The clear trend is a massive decline in recorded music revenues year on year on year. And that's the simple fact that people aren't spending money on music in the way that they once did. So some companies' revenues are up. EMI had a couple of very good years of increasing revenues despite that global pattern, maybe thanks in part to some of this. But so revenues can go up and down, and individual years can go up and down. But the clear trend is a move away from spending money on recorded music in the way people once did. And I think that's the background to this whole challenge.
Thank you. Just a couple of more questions here. We have a question from Chris. Chris would like to know, how often is the data refreshed or updated?
Yeah, so we've got like 5 to 10 surveys going out a week now, all year round. So in any given country, that means for big countries, we probably have monthly waves of research going out. So once a month for the artists or projects that were super important. For other artists, if the artist hasn't been active recently, then the data might be, a year old or something, but not much older than that, because things do change even for big artists that aren't very active. But we're nimble enough in big countries, monthly refreshes of the data that we really, really care about, and annual refreshes of the kind of data that doesn't really move that much, and we just need an annual read on it. So as nimble as we need to be, and I think that's one of the key points going into this, which is that none of this was prescribed. What we did was to say, well, how often do we need the data refreshed, and for what topics or subjects or artists or songs do we need monthly data? For what do we really care about? We can just check once every couple of years. And if the answer was that we needed weekly research, then we'd have redesigned the process to refresh everything weekly. So I think we started with the business needs and worked backwards, but we ended up with kind of monthly to annual, that kind of range.
Great, thank you. Question now from Alexander. He would like to know, do you have any examples of how you present the data?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could try and include a couple in the slides that I send over to go up online. I think the interesting thing about that, I guess, is trying to find the trade-off between complexity. So this is cool data. Look at all this great data. Wow, look at all these data points. And simplicity, so that the person or the artist in that meeting can glance at it and work out what they want to get. And what I try to do, my preference on that is to find the sweet spot in the middle of those two, so that you can just glance at the screen. For example, we have these 5 really nerdy scatter graphs, which are at the heart of everything we do for our artists. So I sat with artists and household name artists and managers and looked at these 5 really cool scatter graphs. And I always say to them, like, don't read the axes, don't read the headings, just look at where there's loads of green and blue. That means really, really good. So find the green and blue and look at the labels next to it. That's your conclusion. And if all the greens and the blues are where it says true fans, it means you've got a lot of true fans. If the greens and blues are over near where it says, discovery, that means you've got a lot of work to do to help people discover you. So even without looking at all the axes and the various labels, just simply looking at where the colors are brightest, tells you roughly what the answer is. And then if you want to delve in, read the axis of the scatter graphs, and look at the individual nuances of each of the different points and where they are relative to each other. Dive into that level of detail if you want, but you don't need to. So trying to get that balance where actually there's a lot of data on the page, and it's really quite complex. You could study it for a long time, but at the same time, you can just glance at it as you're running to a meeting and pick up the headlines. Or if you're not that interested in the data, you can just glance at it and get your headlines. Finding that balance, I think, is the real challenge. And I guess for me, that's the real key. And then secondly, which we talked about in the earlier question, but is standardization. It's that you can get away with that level of complexity of a chart, for example, if that chart is totally standard and you use the same chart for every time you do a presentation. If you're constantly evolving the chart or personalizing it for every single presentation, that level of complexity just won't fly. But if you can keep it standard, then you can be much richer and more engaging in the kind of content that you present.
Wonderful. Just a couple more questions here as we wrap up, folks. Question from James. He would like to know, do you ever question your conclusions and the collection of data?
Absolutely. Good God. There have been a lot of times where we've sat down and we've had quite a bold conclusion on research for an artist. The research has come back and it really wasn't very good, let's say, or the opposite, where the research has come back and it's just been so glowing, it's unbelievable. And we've gone to the business and said, really timidly saying, the research isn't very good, I'm so sorry, let's take a look, let's try and work out what the problem is. And you know what usually happens? The business will say, you know what, I was really worried about that. Yes, I've been excited about that track, but in the back of my mind, I was worried that it really wasn't going to go down that well, or I really thought that opportunity was big. So you know what? Yes, always and often question it, and often, it's not a total surprise to people when it comes out that way. And I think there are times though when it just doesn't work. When you've researched something, it really looked like it was going to be a great piece of music that was going to go down very well with a wide audience, and then we did our best, and really the sales and reception it just didn't match up. But they're the ones that excite me much more than when it works, because what that means is there's something you can do differently. It means maybe the question wasn't quite right, or maybe you didn't play the right piece of music, or maybe you're interpreting the results in the wrong way, and they're opportunities to learn. So I seek those out every single time and dive into them in great detail. Never do we gloss over them. And one of the consistent themes, and we talked earlier about needing to look at different consumer segments. One of the consistent themes is that we didn't read the segments right. Yeah, the research was great and it was glowing, it was glowing amongst maybe some consumer segments who don't typically buy music nowadays, or consumer segments who aren't that interested in streaming services or whatever the marketing channels we used were. And actually, if we just looked at what this key consumer segment thought about the music, we would have seen it earlier on that actually it was going to be a challenge to reach the mainstream. So when it doesn't work, when we have problems like that, I love it, and it means that we can get smarter about how we read it in the future.
Super. And with that, folks, we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to say a very big thank you to you, David, for presenting a really outstanding and fascinating webcast for us all today, and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Great. Comments are coming in from the audience. They're saying thank you as well. They really enjoyed the event. Great. Folks that attended, thank you so much for attending our webcast today. We hope you've benefited from it. We'd like to let you all know that we do have another Strata conference coming up February 26th through the 28th here in California, Santa Clara, California. A little pop-up there on your screen. If you're interested in attending that, you can meet great people, learn a lot. As we told you, David did present at our last event in New York, so if you want to hear about big data and how you and your business can use it and get started with it right away, please, we encourage you to take a look at our conference, Strata Conference, February 26th to 28th in California. You can save 20% on your registration with code WEB20. Again, thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.